The auction hall of Zeta-12 space station hummed with the murmur of prospective buyers, the air thick with the smell of machine oil and desperation. Jace Rowan leaned against a support column, trying to appear casual despite his racing heart. This was his chance, maybe his only chance, to get back on his feet. Lot 47, a Carpathian-class light freighter. Designation, Nixara, the auctioneer announced, his holographic image flickering slightly above the crowd. Starting bid at 5,000 credits. Jace studied the ship displayed on the central screen. The Nixara was old, probably pre-war, with a hull that had seen better days. Rust patches dotted its surface like some kind of mechanical disease, and at least 2 of its 4 thruster ports showed signs of emergency welding. But beneath the decay, Jace recognized quality engineering. Carpathian-class vessels were built to last. Silence filled the auction hall. No one raised their bidding chips. "Come now," the auctioneer said, his artificial smile wavering. "This vessel has a functional hyperdrive and life support system. Perfect for a private courier or small cargo runs. Only 5,000 credits. That's practically scrap value." A heavy-set Krull trader near the front huffed, "That ship's haunted. 3 previous owners disappeared. No thanks." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jace's interest peaked. Superstitions often drove prices down, and after 5 years in the Galactic Defense Force, he'd seen enough to know most hauntings had perfectly rational explanations. 4,000, then, the auctioneer said, desperation creeping into his voice. Jace raised his chip. 3,000. The auctioneer's eyes widened, then narrowed. "We have 3,000 from the gentleman in the back. Any other bids?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one challenged him. Going once, going twice. Sold. Lot 47, the Nixara, to bidder number 623. 20 minutes, and a thumb scan later. Jace was the proud owner of a possibly haunted, definitely decrepit spaceship. The station administrator handed him a worn datapad containing the ship's codes and registration. "Docking Bay 17, she said without looking up. "You have 48 hours before storage fees apply." Jace nodded and headed toward the lower levels. As he walked, he scrolled through the ship's manifest. Most systems were listed as functional but outdated, which was administrator speak for likely to fail at the worst possible moment. The hyperdrive was rated for short jumps only, and the life support system needed a complete filtration overhaul. But it was his. After 5 years of military service and another 3 drifting between mechanic jobs, Jace finally had something that belonged to him alone. Docking Bay 17 was tucked away in a neglected corner of the station. When the door slid open, Jace got his first real look at the Nixara. In person, it looked even worse than in the display. The ship was roughly cylindrical with a flattened cockpit and 4 nacelles extending from its aft section. Its hull was painted a faded blue, with patches of primer gray where repairs had been made. "Well, aren't you a beauty in disguise?" Jace muttered as he approached the ship's main hatch. The entry code from the datapad worked on the 3rd try, and the hatch creaked open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The air that escaped smelled stale but not toxic, a good sign that the environmental systems were at least partially functional. Jace stepped inside, and motion-activated lights flickered to life, revealing a cramped but efficiently designed interior. The main corridor ran the length of the ship with doors leading to the cockpit, engine room, a small mess hall, and what appeared to be crew quarters. Something about the layout seemed off to Jace. The corridor was narrower than standard specifications, and there was an odd bulkhead where there shouldn't be one. Either this was a custom job, or the ship had been modified after leaving the factory. Jace made his way to the cockpit and settled into the pilot's chair. The console lit up when he placed his hand on the biometric scanner, transferring ownership to him. As systems came online one by one, he studied the readouts. The ship had indeed seen better days, but most of the critical components were functional. With some work, and a few replacement parts. He could have it space-worthy within a week. A soft clicking sound behind him made Jace spin around, hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm he no longer carried. The cockpit was empty. Just settling noises, he told himself, though his combat instincts remained on high alert. Over the next few hours, Jace methodically checked each system, making notes of what needed immediate attention and what could wait. The engines needed a thorough cleaning but would work in a pinch. Life support was operating at 68% efficiency. Not great, but not immediately dangerous. The navigation system was surprisingly up to date, suggesting a previous owner had invested in at least some upgrades. It was while inspecting the AI core in a small room off the engine bay that Jace discovered the anomaly. Behind a false panel that his scanner identified as hollow space, he found a sealed door. It wasn't on any of the ship's schematics. "Now what are you hiding?" he murmured, running his fingers along the seam. The panel had no visible locking mechanism or access pad. Jace pressed his ear against it and heard nothing. After a moment's consideration, he retrieved a pry bar from his toolkit and carefully worked it into the seam. With a pop and hiss of breaking seals, the panel came loose. Behind it was a small chamber bathed in a soft blue light, and inside that chamber, suspended in a clear, viscous fluid, was a woman. Jace stumbled backward, nearly dropping the pry bar. The woman appeared to be sleeping, her chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. She wasn't human, at least not entirely. Her skin had a faint silver-blue sheen, and delicate patterns that looked like circuits traced her exposed arms and face. Long platinum hair floated around her in the suspension fluid. "What the hell?" Jace whispered. The woman's eyes snapped open. They were startlingly violet with no visible pupils, and they fixed directly on Jace. Her mouth opened in what appeared to be a silent scream, and the suspension fluid began to drain rapidly from the chamber. Jace backed away, unsure whether to run or try to help. Before he could decide, the chamber's front panel slid open, and the woman collapsed forward. Acting on instinct, he lunged to catch her before she hit the floor. She was surprisingly light in his arms, her skin cool to the touch. Up close, he could see that the circuit-like patterns pulsed with a faint, internal light. She coughed, expelling some of the suspension fluid, then drew a ragged breath. "What? Who are you?" she managed in a voice that was both melodic and slightly synthetic, as though her vocal cords were adjusting to use. "I'm Jace," he replied, still supporting her weight. "I just bought this ship. Who are you, and why were you in there?" Her violet eyes narrowed slightly as she studied his face. "You're not Genetic Purity Council?" "I don't even know what that is." She seemed to relax slightly at this. "My name is Alara. This is the Nixara, yes?" Jace nodded. "How long?" she asked, her voice strengthening. "How long has it been?" "Since what?" "Since the fall of Seralith. Since the Purge." Jace shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. What's Seralith?" Alara's eyes widened in disbelief. "You don't know of the Seralith? Of the Biomech Wars? What year is this by your calendar?" "It's 2471, Jace replied. She closed her eyes briefly, as if performing a calculation. 47 years, she whispered. "I've been in suspension for 47 years. Jace helped her to a sitting position against the wall. "Look, I think you need to explain what's going on here. Why were you hidden on this ship? What's a Seralith?" Alara took a deep breath, then met his gaze directly. "I am Seralith. Or rather, I was. My people were removed from galactic history, systematically exterminated by the Genetic Purity Council, because our advancements in biointegration technology threatened their power structure." "Biointegration?" "The merging of biological and mechanical systems," she explained, gesturing to the circuit-like patterns on her skin. We developed ways to communicate directly with machines, to enhance our bodies with technology that became part of us, rather than remaining separate. Jace frowned. That doesn't sound like something worth genocide. It wasn't just that, Alara said. Our final breakthrough was living technology, machines that could grow, heal, and evolve. The Council feared it would make them obsolete. She paused, studying him. You truly don't know any of this? Jace shook his head. The official history says there was a brief conflict with a rogue AI alliance about 50 years ago. But nothing about biomech wars or genocide. A bitter smile crossed Alara's face. History is written by the victors, as your species says. The Council has been very thorough in erasing us. So why are you still alive? How did you end up here? Alara's expression darkened. I was the royal engineer for House Zavari. When the attacks began, the royal family ordered me to preserve our knowledge. Was one of the few with the complete genetic codes for our living technology embedded in my DNA. She touched one of the glowing patterns on her arm. I became the carrier of my people's legacy. The ship was programmed to keep me in stasis until it could find a safe haven. Jace ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this information. So, I've just bought a ship with a refugee from a genocidal war who's carrying extinct alien tech in her DNA? That would be an accurate summary, yes. Great, Jace muttered. Just great. Alara struggled to stand, and Jace automatically moved to help her. Once upright, she was almost as tall as he was. She wore what appeared to be a form-fitting jumpsuit, made of a material that shifted colors slightly as she moved. I should leave, she said. My presence puts you in danger. If the Council discovers I survived... You can barely stand, Jace pointed out. Where exactly do you plan to go? Before she could answer, a loud clang echoed through the ship, followed by the unmistakable sound of the main hatch being forced open. Were you followed? Alara whispered, suddenly alert. No, but... Jace's mind raced. The auction. Everyone heard me buy this ship. If someone knows who is on board... Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Alara's eyes widened in fear. Hide, Jace whispered, pushing her toward the suspension chamber. Not in there, she hissed. If they restart the stasis cycle... Fine. Then, behind the maintenance panel. He pointed to a loose section of wall plating. Quickly. As Alara squeezed into the tight space, Jace closed the panel and moved to block the entrance to the AI core room. He had just adopted a casual stance when 3 figures appeared in the doorway. 2 were clearly security drones, humanoid, but with distinctly mechanical movements and featureless faceplates. Between them stood a man in an immaculate white uniform with gold trim. His thin face wore an expression of smug authority. Mr. Rowan, the man said with a slight nod. I am Inspector Kell of the Genetic Purity Council's Enforcement Division. I understand you've recently acquired this vessel. Jace kept his expression neutral. That's right. Just picked it up at auction a few hours ago. Kell smiled thinly. A fortunate purchase. However, I'm afraid we've detected an illegal biological signature aboard. Council protocol requires a full inspection and possible decontamination. Decontamination, Jace repeated, mind racing. Look, I just bought this heap. I haven't even had time to check all the systems yet. Whatever biological signature you're picking up is probably just mold in the air filters. Nevertheless, Kell gestured, and the drones moved forward. Step aside, please. Jace didn't move. Do you have authorization for this? Because last I checked, private vessels require owner consent for boarding and inspection, unless there's a warrant. Kell's smile faded. The Genetic Purity Council operates under special jurisdiction when it comes to biological threats. Now step aside, or my drones will move you. For a moment, Jace considered his options. He could comply and hope they didn't find Alara, or he could resist and definitely raise suspicion. Neither seemed likely to end well. Then, a third option presented itself when the lights in the corridor suddenly flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. A second later, emergency red lighting activated, casting eerie shadows. "What's happening?" Kel demanded. As if in answer, the ship's engines roared to life, the vibration running through the deck plates beneath their feet. "I don't know," Jace said truthfully. "I didn't activate anything." A computerized voice echoed through the ship. "Security breach detected. Initiating emergency protocols. All unauthorized personnel must evacuate immediately." The drone's head unit swiveled toward Kel, awaiting instructions. "Override," Kel commanded. "Authorization Kel Gamma 97. "Authorization not recognized," the ship's voice responded. "Hostile intent detected. Deploying countermeasures in 10 seconds. Kel's composed demeanor cracked. "This isn't over, Rowan," he snapped before turning to the drones. "We're leaving. Now." Jace watched in bewilderment as Kel and his drones retreated down the corridor. Moments later, the sound of the main hatch closing echoed through the ship. The engines continued to rumble, and Jace felt a slight shift as the docking clamps released. The Nyxara was preparing to leave without his input. "Alara," he called out. "What's happening?" The maintenance panel slid open, and Alara emerged, her circuit-like patterns glowing brighter than before. One hand was pressed against the wall, and the patterns seemed to extend from her fingers into the ship's structure. "I've initiated emergency departure," she said, her voice overlapping slightly with the ship's computerized tones. "The Nyxara recognizes my genetic signature as an authorized user." "You can control the ship?" Jace asked incredulously. "To an extent. The Nyxara has Serolith components. It responds to my biosignals." She winced suddenly, the glow of her patterns dimming. "But it's been too long. The connection is weak, and I'm still recovering from stasis." Jace felt the ship shudder as it pulled away from the docking bay. "We can't just leave. I'm not prepared for space travel. I don't have supplies. Fuel." "We have no choice," Alara interrupted. "That was a Genetic Purity Council inspector. They'll be back with reinforcements, if they capture me." She didn't finish the sentence, but her expression conveyed the gravity of the situation. "Fine," Jace conceded, making a quick decision. "But if we're running, I need to be at the controls. Can you get us past station security?" Alara nodded. "For a short time. The ship remembers me, but the connection is strained after so many years. Then let's get to the cockpit." As they made their way forward, Jace's mind raced. In the span of an hour, he'd gone from proud ship owner to fugitive harboring an alien refugee. It wasn't the fresh start he'd been hoping for. In the cockpit, Jace slid into the pilot's seat, while Alara took the co-pilot position. Her hands hovered over the console, the patterns on her skin extending into the ship's systems like luminous roots. "Station security is hailing us," she reported. "Ignore it," Jace said as he familiarized himself with the controls. The layout was standard enough, though some systems had been modified with interfaces he didn't recognize, presumably Serolith technology. Through the viewport, he could see the station's defense turrets tracking their movement. "They're preparing to fire," Alara warned. "Can you mask our signature? Make us look like something else?" Alara's brow furrowed in concentration. "Perhaps. The Nyxara has basic camouflage capabilities." The patterns on her arms pulsed, and the ship shuddered slightly. On the sensor display, their identification signal flickered and changed to that of a station maintenance vessel. "That won't fool them for long," she said, her voice strained. "We need to reach jump distance." Jace pushed the engines to full power, feeling the ship vibrate worryingly as it accelerated away from the station. The hyperdrive whined as it began to charge. "Jump calculations?" he asked. "Already set," Alara replied. "The Nyxara remembers safe coordinates from before." "Before what? Before the genocide?" Jace glanced at her. That was 47 years ago. Those coordinates might not be safe anymore. It's our only option. We need to clear the system before attempting a better solution. A warning klaxon sounded as the station's security ships launched in pursuit. Hyperdrive at 80%, Jace reported, watching the indicators. We're not going to make it to safe jump distance before they're in range. Alara's patterns flared brighter. Yes, we will. Suddenly, the ship lurched forward with unexpected speed, the engines howling in protest. The acceleration pressed them back into their seats. What did you do? Jace demanded, watching the engine output indicators redline. Bypass the safety protocols, Alara said through gritted teeth. The ship can handle it. Barely. The pursuing vessels fell back slightly, surprised by their sudden acceleration. It bought them precious seconds as the hyperdrive reached full charge. Jump in 3, 2, 1. The stars stretched into lines, and the Nyxara plunged into hyperspace, leaving Zeta 12 and its pursuers behind. The vibration of the overtaxed engines gradually subsided as the ship settled into the jump. Jace released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. Alara slumped in her seat, the glow of her patterns dimming. Yes, she agreed weakly, but we escaped. For now. Jace turned to face her. But I think you owe me a more detailed explanation, starting with why the Genetic Purity Council wants you badly enough to violate standard boarding protocols. Alara's violet eyes met his. They want me because I'm the last carrier of Serolith biotechnology, the last proof of their crimes. She gestured to the patterns on her skin. These aren't just decorative, they're living circuitry, interfaces between my biology and mechanical systems. But more importantly, my DNA contains the complete genetic codes for our most advanced technologies. Like what? Living ships, self-healing structures, biological computers that grow and learn organically. She paused. Technology that could make much of the Council's power base obsolete. Jace whistled low. No wonder they want you gone. It's not just that, Alara continued. If the truth about what they did to my people becomes widely known, it could destabilize the entire Galactic Union. They didn't just wage war against us. They systematically erased us from history afterward. The implications sank in slowly. Jace had served in the Galactic Defense Force, believing he was protecting civilization against threats. Now he was confronted with the possibility that the very government he'd served had committed genocide and covered it up. So, what's your plan? He finally asked. You've been in stasis for nearly 50 years. The galaxy has changed. Where can you go that's safe? Alara looked down at her hands. I don't know, she admitted. The Nyxara was programmed to wake me when it found a safe haven or detected signs of surviving Serolith. Neither has happened. Then why did you wake up when I opened your chamber? Emergency protocols. The stasis system detected potential threat when the chamber was breached. Jace ran a hand through his hair, thinking. So we've got a ship that barely flies, limited supplies, no clear destination, and one of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy hunting us. That about sum it up? Alara's lips curved in a slight smile, despite the gravity of their situation. You forgot to mention that I'm still recovering from long-term stasis, and can't maintain bioconnection with the ship for extended periods. Great. Even better. Jace checked the navigation console. Where exactly are we heading, anyway? The coordinates are for a mining outpost in the Vega sector. It was neutral territory during the conflict. Vega's been under Union control for at least 30 years now, Jace informed her. But it's a busy commercial hub. We might be able to resupply and gather information before anyone realizes we're there. Alara nodded slowly. That would be helpful. Jace noticed her eyelids drooping and her patterns flickering like a failing light. Hey, are you okay? Stasis recovery, she murmured. Need to rest, regenerate. Before Jace could respond, Alara slumped forward. unconscious. He caught her before she hit the console and carefully lifted her from the co-pilot seat. She was lighter than she looked, her body temperature noticeably cooler than human norm. "Just when I thought life couldn't get more complicated," he muttered as he carried her to the crew quarters. The Nixara continued its hyperspace journey, its outdated systems straining to maintain the jump. In the quiet of the cockpit, Jace contemplated his options. He could drop Alara at the first safe port and wash his hands of the situation. The Genetic Purity Council would eventually find her, but that wasn't his problem. Except something about abandoning her didn't sit right with him. Maybe it was the years he'd spent believing in the Defense Force's mission to protect the innocent. Maybe it was the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite waking to find her entire civilization gone. Or maybe he was just tired of running from one thing after another. With a sigh, Jace settled back into the pilot seat. Whatever he decided, they needed to reach Vega first. After that, well, he'd figure it out as he went along. It wouldn't be the first time. The next 12 hours passed in relative quiet. Jace alternated between monitoring the ship's systems and checking on Alara, who remained unconscious but stable. Her circuit-like patterns continued to pulse with a soft light, which he took as a good sign. The Nixara's hyperdrive was holding together better than expected, though several systems were operating well outside their recommended parameters. Jace made mental notes of components that would need replacement or repair when they reached Vega. He was running a diagnostic on the life support system when a soft chime indicated they were approaching their destination. The ship shuddered slightly as it prepared to drop out of hyperspace. "End of the line," Jace murmured, returning to the cockpit. The hyperdrive disengaged with a whine of protesting machinery, and normal space snapped back into view. Jace checked the navigation display and frowned. They weren't in the Vega sector, at least. Not the Vega he knew. The star patterns were wrong, and the system ahead contained not the bustling commercial hub he expected, but a single, yellow star orbited by 3 planets. "Where the hell are we?" he wondered aloud. "Zovari system," came Alara's voice from behind him. Jace turned to find her standing in the doorway, steadier on her feet than before, but still pale. The patterns on her skin glowed with renewed intensity. "I thought you said we were going to Vega," he said. Alara moved to the co-pilot seat. "I said the coordinates were for a mining outpost in the Vega sector, but the Nixara's true programming was to bring me here when safe to do so." "And where exactly is here?" "The ancestral home of House Zovari," she replied, gazing at the planets ahead. "And possibly the last refuge of Serolith technology." Jace checked the ship's database, but found no entry for the Zovari system. "It's not on any standard charts." "No, it wouldn't be. The Council would have removed it." Alara touched the console, and the patterns on her fingers connected with the ship's systems. "The third planet was our colony world. If any of my people survived, they would have gone to the deep shelters there." Jace studied the sensor readings. "I'm not detecting any artificial structures or energy signatures. If anyone's down there, they're well hidden." "Or long gone," Alara said quietly. "The shelters were designed to last decades, not half a century." "So what now?" Alara's violet eyes met his. "I need to go to the surface, to know for certain." Jace hesitated. Every instinct told him this was a bad idea. If the Genetic Purity Council had gone to such lengths to erase the Serolith, they might be monitoring the system. Plus, the Nixara was barely holding together after one hyperspace jump. Atmospheric entry might tear it apart. "Look," he began, "I understand you want answers, but—" "I don't expect you to take me," Alara interrupted. "You've already risked enough by helping me escape. The Nixara has a shuttle bay with a functional landing craft. I can use that. And then what? You land on a potentially uninhabited planet with no supplies. No backup plan?" "I'll manage." Her tone made it clear the decision wasn't open for debate. Jace sighed. At least let me check the shuttle first. Make sure it's actually flight-worthy. The shuttle bay was located at the aft section of the ship, behind a pair of heavy doors that hadn't been opened in years. It took both of them pushing to slide the doors apart enough to enter. Inside, a small craft sat on landing struts. It was sleeker than the Nexara, with a design that emphasized function over form. Like the main ship, it showed signs of age and disuse, but appeared structurally sound. Jace circled the craft, examining its hull for damage. Looks intact, but the power cells are probably dead after all this time. Alara placed a hand on the shuttle's hull, and the patterns on her skin extended into the metal. After a moment, the craft's running lights flickered to life. Basic systems are operational, she reported. It will fly. Maybe, Jace conceded. But atmospheric entry is going to be rough. The heat shields haven't been serviced in who knows how long. It's a risk I have to take. Alara moved to the shuttle's hatch and activated the entry sequence. Jace watched as the hatch slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. He knew he should let her go. It wasn't his fight. Wasn't his problem. He'd already stuck his neck out further than was wise by helping her escape from Zeta-12. But the thought of her facing whatever was on that planet alone didn't sit right with him. Wait, he said as she prepared to board the shuttle. I'm coming with you. Alara turned, surprise evident in her expression. Why would you do that? You've already done more than enough. Jace shrugged, not entirely sure of his own motivations. Let's just say I'm curious. Besides, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. And if there is anyone down there, they might be more willing to talk if you're not alone. The ghost of a smile crossed Alara's face. Very well. But we should leave soon. The Nexara's presence might eventually be detected, even in this remote system. They spent the next hour preparing for the descent. Jace gathered what supplies he could find aboard the Nexara: emergency rations, a basic medical kit, some tools that might prove useful. Alara interfaced with the ship's systems, downloading star charts and any information that might help them navigate the planet's surface. When they were ready, they boarded the shuttle. The interior was cramped but efficient, with seating for 4 and a small cargo area behind the main cabin. The control panel lit up as Alara connected with it, her patterns extending into the shuttle systems. The auto-navigation still recognizes landing coordinates, she reported. We can use that to find the main shelter entrance. Jace strapped himself into the co-pilot seat. Let's hope it still exists. The shuttle detached from the Nexara with a gentle push from its maneuvering thrusters. As they moved away from the main ship, Jace got his first good look at the Nexara from the outside. Despite its age and wear, there was something elegant about its design, a harmony of form and function that spoke of careful engineering. She's not as ugly as I thought, he commented. Alara followed his gaze. The Nexara was a diplomatic vessel once, built to showcase Serolith craftsmanship while maintaining practical capabilities. How did it end up as your escape ship? When the attacks began, it was one of the few vessels equipped with a stasis chamber, compatible with my biology. Her expression darkened. The royal family sacrificed their own escape to ensure I got away. They believed preserving our technology was more important than saving themselves. The weight of that responsibility was evident in her voice. Jace wondered what it was like to carry the legacy of an entire civilization, to wake and find yourself possibly the last of your kind. They fell silent as the shuttle began its descent toward the 3rd planet. From orbit, it appeared largely oceanic with 3 major landmasses near the equator. The auto-navigation directed them toward the largest continent, where sensor readings indicated a temperate climate with extensive forest cover. Atmospheric entry was as rough as Jace had feared. The shuttle shuddered and groaned as superheated air surrounded them, the ancient heat shields straining to withstand the friction. Warning lights flashed across the console, and for a tense few minutes, it seemed the craft might break apart. Then they were through, gliding down through cloud layers toward the surface below. The auto-navigation guided them to a mountain range near the continent's center, where a plateau opened into a wide valley. "That's it," Alara said, pointing to a formation ahead. "The Valley of Zavari. The main shelter entrance should be near that waterfall." Jace squinted at the terrain below. "I don't see any structures." "You wouldn't. They were designed to blend with the landscape." The shuttle settled onto a clearing near the base of the waterfall, landing struts compressing as they touched down. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the cooling system's work to dissipate the heat of entry. "We made it," Jace said finally. Alara nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Now we find out if it was worth it." They exited the shuttle into a world of vibrant life. The air was thick with moisture from the nearby waterfall, carrying the scent of unfamiliar vegetation. Towering trees with iridescent leaves surrounded the clearing, their trunks spiraling in a way that suggested deliberate design rather than natural growth. "The terraforming held," Alara remarked, touching one of the trees. "These were engineered to process atmospheric toxins. The fact that they're still thriving means the ecosystem is stable." Jace kept a wary eye on their surroundings as they moved toward the waterfall. "Any signs of habitation? Buildings? Technology?" "Not yet, but—" Alara stopped suddenly, her head tilting as if listening to something Jace couldn't hear. "This way?" She led him along the base of the cliff from which the waterfall descended. The rock face appeared natural at first glance, but as they drew closer, Jace noticed subtle patterns in the stone, not quite writing, but too regular to be random erosion. Alara placed her hand against one such pattern, and the circuits on her skin flared bright. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a rumble that Jace felt through his boots, a section of the cliff face receded, revealing a dark passageway. "The recognition protocols still work," Alara said, her voice tight with emotion. "This is a good sign." They entered the passage, and lights activated along the ceiling, illuminating a corridor that sloped gently downward. The walls were smooth, made of a material that resembled stone but felt slightly yielding to the touch. More of the circuit-like patterns ran along the floor and ceiling, pulsing faintly as they passed. "The shelter is responding to my presence," Alara explained. "Waking up after decades of dormancy." The corridor opened into a vast chamber that took Jace's breath away. The ceiling soared at least 30 meters overhead, glowing with the same soft light as the corridor. The chamber was circular, with several levels connected by graceful ramps and bridges. At its center stood what appeared to be a control station, a raised platform surrounded by consoles and display surfaces. But what struck Jace most was the emptiness. There were no people, no signs of recent activity. The chamber was pristine, untouched, a monument waiting for inhabitants who never returned. Alara moved slowly toward the central platform, her steps hesitant. "It's empty," she whispered. "They never made it here." Jace followed, unsure what to say. The scale of her loss was beyond his comprehension. Maybe they went to another shelter, or left the planet entirely. Alara shook her head. "This was our last refuge. If my people survived, they would have come here." She reached the control station and placed both hands on its surface. The patterns on her skin extended into the console, and displays flickered to life around them. Data streamed across the screens in a language Jace couldn't read. Alara's eyes darted from one display to another, absorbing the information with increasing distress. "What is it?" Jace asked. "What does it say?" "Records of the final days," she replied, her voice hollow. "The attack was more coordinated than we realized. The Council used a targeted biological agent that affected only those with serolith genetic modifications, which was most of our population." She continued scanning the displays. "A few hundred survivors made it off-world before the quarantine was established, but the shelter records show no one ever arrived here. So they might have escaped to other systems." "Possible. but unlikely to have survived long term. Our biology requires specific environmental conditions, and the genetic modifications that made us vulnerable were also necessary for our survival. Alara's shoulders slumped. I am likely the last. The finality in her voice made Jace's chest tighten. He couldn't imagine being the sole survivor of humanity, the only one left to remember Earth and its people. The loneliness of it was staggering. I'm sorry, he said inadequately. Alara straightened, composing herself with visible effort. At least the seed bank is intact. Seed bank? She gestured to a sealed door on the chamber's far side. Genetic samples of Cerulith flora and fauna, the building blocks of our ecosystem, preserved for eventual restoration. A bitter smile crossed her face. Though I doubt that will happen now. Jace was about to respond when a sharp beeping came from the control console. Alara's attention snapped back to the displays, her expression changing from sorrow to alarm. What is it? Jace asked, tensing. A ship has entered the system, she reported. Large, military grade. It's scanning for artificial structures. The Council found us, Jace realized. They must have tracked the Nyxara somehow. Alara's fingers flew across the console. They're deploying smaller craft, search vessels, heading for the surface. We need to leave, Jace said urgently. Get back to the shuttle before they locate it. But Alara shook her head. The shuttle's power signature would be detected immediately. And even if we reached orbit, the Nyxara can't outrun a military vessel. So we're trapped? Not necessarily. Alara studied the displays intently. The shelter has defenses, camouflage systems, signal scramblers. I can activate them, but it will take time. How much time? More than we have before those search vessels reach the surface. Jace thought quickly. What if we create a diversion? Use the shuttle to draw them away from the shelter entrance? That could work, but someone would need to pilot it manually. The auto-navigation isn't sophisticated enough for evasive maneuvers. Their eyes met, and understanding passed between them. Someone would have to sacrifice their chance of escape to ensure the other's safety. I'll do it, Jace said before she could offer. You're the one they really want, and you're the only one who can activate the shelter's defenses. Alara's violet eyes searched his face. Why would you do this? You barely know me. It was a fair question. Jace had spent years looking out for himself, avoiding entanglements that might compromise his freedom. Why risk everything for someone he'd just met? Because it's the right thing to do, he answered simply. And because what the Council did to your people, what they're still doing to cover it up, isn't something I can walk away from. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken implications. Then, Alara nodded. Very well. I'll need about 20 minutes to fully activate the shelter's defenses. If you can keep them distracted for that long, I'll do my best. Jace checked his gear. Any weapons in this place I could use? Alara moved to a wall panel and pressed a sequence of patterns. The panel slid open, revealing a rack of sleek, ergonomic devices that Jace assumed were weapons. She selected one and handed it to him. Neural disruptor, she explained. Non-lethal but effective against both organic and mechanical targets. Jace examined the weapon. It fit comfortably in his hand, with no visible trigger, but a series of contact points where his fingers naturally rested. How do I fire it? Intent and contact. Think about activating it while touching these points. He tested it, focusing his thoughts while maintaining contact with the device. A soft hum emanated from the weapon, and a faint glow appeared at its business end. Got it, he said, lowering the disruptor. Anything else I should know before I go? Alara hesitated, then stepped forward and pressed something into his free hand. It was a small disc, similar in appearance to the circuit patterns on her skin. This contains the truth about what happened to my people. Historical records, genetic data, evidence of the Council's actions. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, Jace assured her. But if it does, she persisted, this needs to reach the Galactic Union Senate. There are still those who would act on the truth, even after all this time. Jace pocketed the disc. I'll make sure it gets there. But plan on delivering it yourself, okay? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I'll do my best. They made their way back to the surface, the shelter's entrance sealing behind them. The forest was quiet, except for the constant rush of the waterfall, giving no indication of the approaching threat. 20 minutes, Jace reminded her as they reached the edge of the clearing where the shuttle waited. Then, get to the Nixara and get out of here. The navigation system has the coordinates for Haven Station in the Proxima sector. It's independent, not under Union control. You should be safe there until you figure out your next move. Alara nodded. What about you? I'll try to circle back if I can, he said, though they both knew the chances were slim. If not, well, I've been in worse situations. It was a lie, and from her expression, Alara knew it. But she didn't call him on it. Instead, she did something unexpected. She placed her hand against his chest, over his heart. The patterns on her skin pulsed once, bright and warm. What was that? Jace asked, feeling a strange tingling where she had touched him. An old Seralith custom, she replied. A blessing of protection for those who face danger willingly. Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared into the forest, heading back toward the hidden shelter entrance. Jace watched her go, then took a deep breath and boarded the shuttle. The small craft powered up quickly, its systems responding to his commands with surprising responsiveness. Whatever Alara had done when interfacing with it earlier seemed to have optimized its performance. Jace lifted off, purposely making no attempt to mask the shuttle's energy signature. If he was going to be a diversion, he needed to be obvious. He hadn't gone far when the shuttle's sensors detected approaching craft. 3 of them, moving fast from the upper atmosphere. Military interceptors, by the look of them, designed for atmospheric pursuit and capture. All right then, Jace muttered, gripping the controls tighter. Let's give them something to chase. He pushed the shuttle into a steep climb, then banked hard, heading away from the waterfall and the hidden shelter. The interceptors adjusted course immediately, converging on his position. A voice crackled over the comm system. Unidentified craft. This is Genetic Purity Council enforcement. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Jace ignored the command, instead pushing the shuttle to its maximum speed. The craft shuddered under the strain, but held together as he skimmed the treetops, using the terrain to force his pursuers into a more challenging flight path. It worked, to an extent. The interceptors were faster in open air, but their larger size made them less maneuverable in the confines of the valley. Jace used every trick he'd learned in his Defense Force training, staying low and making unpredictable course changes. But he knew it was only a matter of time. The shuttle wasn't designed for combat or evasion, and the interceptors were steadily closing the gap. A warning light flashed on his console. One of the pursuers had achieved weapons lock. Unidentified craft, this is your final warning. Power down or we will fire. Jace checked the chronometer. 15 minutes had passed since he'd left Alara at the shelter. Not enough time. He needed to keep them distracted longer. Making a split-second decision, he cut power to the main thrusters and dropped the shuttle into a steep ravine. The interceptors overshot, forced to circle back to reacquire their target. It bought him precious seconds, but as he powered up to climb out of the ravine, a searing pain tore through the shuttle's left side. Warning klaxons blared as systems failed. The shuttle lurched, spinning out of control despite Jace's desperate attempts to stabilize it. Through the viewport, he could see the ground rushing up to meet him. The impact came with a deafening crash and a jolt that slammed Jace against his restraints. For a moment, everything went black. When consciousness returned, he was hanging upside down in his harness, the shuttle's interior filled with smoke and the crackle of electrical fires. With painful effort, He released the harness and dropped to what had been the ceiling, now beneath him. The shuttle had come to rest at an angle, its hull breached in multiple places. Through one such gap, Jace could see interceptors circling overhead, preparing to land. He had to move. The neural disruptor was still strapped to his side, miraculously intact. He checked for the data disk Alara had given him, still secure in his pocket. Then, ignoring the pain from what felt like several broken ribs, he squeezed through the breach and into the forest. The dense undergrowth provided cover as he moved away from the crash site. Behind him, he could hear the interceptors landing and voices calling out orders. They would be searching for survivors soon. Jace tried to orient himself. The waterfall and hidden shelter were somewhere to the north, but heading there would only lead the Council forces to Alara. Instead, he moved east, hoping to circle around and find another way to reach the Nixara. He hadn't gone far when a sound stopped him in his tracks, the distinctive whine of a scout drone. The small, disc-shaped machine hovered just above the treetops, its sensors sweeping the area methodically. Jace froze, pressing himself against the trunk of a massive tree, hoping the dense canopy would shield him from detection. The drone passed overhead without pausing, continuing its search pattern deeper into the forest. Jace released the breath he'd been holding and began moving again, more cautiously now. The chronometer on his wrist indicated that 25 minutes had passed since he'd left Alara. If all had gone according to plan, she should have activated the shelter's defenses and be making her way to the Nixara by now. A sudden, ground-shaking explosion made him stumble. Looking back, he saw a column of smoke rising from the direction of the crash site. Had the shuttle's power core destabilized? Or had the Council forces destroyed it to prevent anyone from salvaging the technology? Either way, it created a momentary distraction. Jace used the opportunity to cover more ground, ignoring the growing pain in his side and the warm wetness that suggested at least one of his injuries was bleeding freely. He had just crossed a small stream when a voice called out from behind him, "Stop right there!" Jace turned slowly to find a Council enforcer standing 10 meters away, weapon raised. The man wore the same white uniform with gold trim that Inspector Kell had worn on the Nixara, though this one was adorned with additional insignia indicating higher rank. "Hands where I can see them," the enforcer commanded. Jace complied, raising his hands slowly while keeping the neural disruptor concealed against his forearm. "I'm unarmed," he lied. "Just a salvage operator. Wrong place. Wrong time." The enforcer's expression remained hard. "You're Jace Rowan, former Galactic Defense Force, current fugitive harboring a biological anomaly." He gestured with his weapon. "Where is the Serolith?" So they knew about Alara's species. That confirmed the Council's involvement in the genocide. This wasn't just about capturing an unknown alien. "No idea what you're talking about," Jace replied, edging his hand closer to the disruptor's contact points. "I was testing a refurbished shuttle when your people shot me down. That's attempted murder, by the way." "The Serolith female," the enforcer pressed, ignoring Jace's deflection. "We know she was with you on Zeta-12. Our sensors detected her biological signature on this planet. Where is she hiding?" "Haven't seen any females, human or otherwise, in days," Jace said with a forced grin. "Bad luck all around, I guess." The enforcer's patience visibly thinned. "This is not a negotiation. Rowan, the Serolith represents a significant biological threat to the Galactic Union. Cooperate, and you might avoid the maximum penalty for harboring a restricted organism." "Restricted organism," Jace repeated, anger rising despite his precarious situation. "You mean a survivor of the genocide your council committed? The last of a species you tried to wipe out?" A flicker of surprise crossed the enforcer's face before his expression hardened again. "You've been misinformed. The Serolith were dangerous bioterrorists who—" He never finished the sentence. Taking advantage of the man's momentary distraction, Jace activated the neural disruptor. A pulse of energy shot from the weapon, striking the enforcer squarely in the chest. The man convulsed briefly, then collapsed to the ground, unconscious, but alive. Jace moved quickly to retrieve the man's weapon and communication device. The latter was already squawking with voices demanding status updates. It was only a matter of time before more enforcers converged on this location. He needed to move, and fast. The Nyxara was his best hope now, if he could reach it before the Council forces located it, and if Alara had made it there ahead of him. Pushing through the pain of his injuries, Jace set off toward the mountains where they had left the main ship. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. The forest grew denser as he moved uphill, the trees closing in around him like silent sentinels. More than once, he heard the whine of scout drones or the voices of search parties, forcing him to hide or change course. His progress was agonizingly slow, and the blood loss from his injuries was beginning to make him lightheaded. Just as he was considering finding a place to rest, a familiar sound reached his ears, the low hum of the Nyxara's engines. They were active, which meant someone was aboard. Alara had made it. With renewed determination, Jace pushed forward, following the sound. He crested a ridge and found himself looking down into a small valley where the Nyxara sat, its running lights glowing softly in the gathering dusk. The entry ramp was down, and even from this distance, he could see a figure moving around the exterior of the ship, Alara, performing pre-flight checks. He started down the slope toward her, relief flooding through him. They had a chance. They could still escape. Then, movement at the edge of the valley caught his eye. Council enforcers, at least 6 of them, approaching the Nyxara from the opposite side. They hadn't spotted Alara yet, but it was only a matter of moments. Jace tried to call out a warning, but the distance was too great for his voice to carry. Instead, he raised the enforcer's weapon and fired a shot into the air. The energy bolt streaked upward, a clear signal that couldn't be ignored. Alara's head snapped up at the sound, her gaze finding Jace on the ridge. Then, she spotted the approaching enforcers. Without hesitation, she raced up the entry ramp into the ship. The enforcers broke into a run, realizing their quarry was escaping. One raised a heavy weapon to his shoulder, an ion cannon, capable of disabling a ship's systems. Jace fired at the man, forcing him to take cover before he could shoot. The Nyxara's engines roared louder as they powered up to full capacity. The entry ramp began to close, but paused halfway. Alara appeared in the opening, gesturing frantically for Jace to hurry. He half ran, half slid down the slope, ignoring the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. The enforcers had spotted him now and were dividing their fire between him and the ship. Energy bolts sizzled past, scorching the ground and trees around him. 50 meters to the ship, 40, 30. A bolt struck the ground just in front of Jace, the concussive force throwing him backward. He landed hard, the world spinning around him. Through blurred vision, he saw Alara at the ramp, her expression desperate. "Go!" he tried to shout, his voice emerging as little more than a rasp. "Take off!" But instead of retreating into the ship, Alara did something unexpected. She stepped fully onto the ramp, raised her arms, and the circuit patterns on her skin flared with blinding intensity. The patterns seemed to expand, flowing outward from her body in waves of luminous energy. The enforcers closest to the ship staggered and fell, their weapons dropping from suddenly limp hands. Even at his distance, Jace felt a wave of disorientation wash over him, though less severely. Using the distraction, he forced himself to his feet and made a final desperate sprint for the ship. His lungs burned, and each step sent shards of pain through his injured side. But he pushed on. 20 meters, 10, 5. And then he was there, stumbling up the ramp as Alara caught him, supporting his weight. Together, they staggered into the ship as the ramp closed behind them. "The cockpit," Jace gasped. "We need to get airborne before they recover." Alara helped him forward, her own movements less steady than before. Whatever she had done to incapacitate the enforcers had clearly taken a toll on her. The patterns on her skin flickered weakly, some sections going dark entirely. They reached the cockpit, and Jace collapsed into the pilot's seat, while Alara took the co-pilot position. His hands moved automatically over the controls, initiating the launch sequence with practiced efficiency, despite his injuries. The Nyxara shuddered as it lifted off, straining against the planet's gravity. Through the viewport, Jace could see the remaining enforcers regrouping, several raising weapons toward the rising ship. "Hang on," he warned as he pushed the engines to maximum thrust. The ship shot upward, accelerating through the atmosphere with bone-jarring speed. Warning indicators flashed across the console. The hull integrity was compromised in several sections. Life support was operating at reduced capacity, and the hyperdrive was showing signs of instability. The Nyxara had not been designed for such punishment. "We've got company," Alara reported, her voice weak but determined. On the sensor display, the Council's military vessel was moving to intercept them as they reached orbit. "Can you interface with the ship?" Jace asked. "Give us an edge?" Alara placed her hands on the console, but the patterns on her skin barely responded. "I've expended too much energy. The biological connection is failing." "Then we do this the old-fashioned way." Jace's fingers flew over the controls, plotting a course that would take them past the military vessel at the closest possible distance. It was a desperate gambit. Their only chance was to get past the larger ship and into hyperspace before it could bring its weapons to bear. The military vessel loomed ahead, its massive bulk filling the viewport. It was already maneuvering to cut them off, tractor beams powering up to snare the smaller ship. "Diverting all power to engines and shields," Jace announced, making the adjustments. "This is going to be close." The Nyxara accelerated toward the military vessel, closing the distance rapidly. At the last possible moment, Jace yanked the controls, sending the ship into a spiraling dive that took them under the larger vessel's belly. The military ship's tractor beams missed by meters, and its weapon systems struggled to track the smaller, faster target. Energy bolts streaked past the Nyxara, a few glancing off its weakened shields, but none scoring a direct hit. Then they were past, the hyperspace corridor opening ahead. "Hyperdrive engaged," Jace called out as he activated the jump sequence. The stars stretched into lines, and the Nyxara plunged into hyperspace, leaving the Council vessel behind. For a moment, both Jace and Alara sat in silence, scarcely believing they had escaped. Then, the reality of their situation reasserted itself as more warning indicators lit up across the console. "Hyperdrive stability at 42%. Alara read from the display. "Hull breach in sections 3 and 7. Life support failing in the aft compartments." Jace nodded grimly. "We're not going far in this condition." He checked the navigation system. "There's a system about 6 hours away at our current speed, uninhabited, but with a breathable atmosphere. We can set down there, make repairs." 6 hours may be optimistic," Alara observed, gesturing to the hyperdrive readings. "The containment field is fluctuating." She was right. At the current rate of degradation, the hyperdrive might fail completely before they reached their destination. "Then we push the engines harder," Jace decided. "Get there faster, even if it means burning out the drive in the process." Alara looked at him, her violet eyes reflecting the console's warning lights. "That's extremely risky." "So is floating dead in space, waiting for that Council ship to find us," he countered. "We take our chances with the hyperdrive." After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "I'll try to stabilize the containment field as much as possible." Despite her weakened state, Alara placed her hands on the console again, forcing her biological connection to engage. The patterns on her skin flickered painfully, but she maintained the connection, channeling what little energy she had left into the ship's systems. Jace, meanwhile, diverted power from every non-essential system to the hyperdrive, pushing the engines beyond their safety limits. The ship shuddered and groaned around them, the hull plates vibrating with the strain. "How are you holding up?" he asked Alara after nearly an hour of this desperate effort. She didn't respond immediately. Her skin had paled to an ashen hue, and the circuit patterns were barely visible now, like dying embers. "I'm managing," she finally replied, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "We're making progress," Jace assured her, checking the navigation display. "ETA now 4 hours instead of 6. Think you can hold on that long?" Alara nodded, but her expression suggested otherwise. The biological connection was draining what little strength she had left after the confrontation with the enforcers. "Let me take over," Jace suggested. "You need to rest." "Can't," she said through gritted teeth. "The connection has to be maintained, or the field will collapse." Understanding dawned on Jace. The hyperdrive wasn't being maintained by the ship's systems alone. Alara was essentially becoming part of the machinery, her biological circuits integrating with the technology to keep it functioning beyond its normal capacity. "There has to be another way," he insisted. "You're killing yourself." A faint smile touched her lips. "Not quite, but I will need extensive recovery time." Before Jace could argue further, an alarm sounded from the life support console. The oxygen levels in the main cabin were dropping. Another system failure. "I need to check the environmental controls," he said reluctantly. "Will you be okay here for a few minutes?" Alara nodded weakly, her focus remaining on the hyperdrive interface. Jace made his way to the life support control room, every step a reminder of his own injuries. The adrenaline of their escape was wearing off, and the pain was returning with a vengeance. He suspected at least 2 broken ribs and possible internal bleeding. The life support system was a mess. One of the main oxygen generators had failed completely, and the backup was operating at minimal capacity. Jace worked quickly, rerouting power and sealing off non-essential compartments to preserve what atmosphere they had. It would buy them time, but not much. They needed to reach that planet soon, or they'd be facing suffocation in addition to the hyperdrive's imminent failure. When he returned to the cockpit, Alara was slumped forward in her seat, unconscious. The patterns on her skin had gone dark, but her hands remained on the console, locked in position by some final effort of will. "Alara!" Jace moved to her side, checking for vital signs. Her pulse was faint but present, her breathing shallow. The hyperdrive readings showed the containment field stabilizing, even without her conscious input. Whatever she had done before losing consciousness was still working, for now. Jace carefully moved her to a more comfortable position, making sure her hands maintained contact with the console. Then he returned to the pilot's seat and checked their progress. 3 hours to destination. The ship's systems were failing one by one. Life support was minimal, and both of them were injured, but they were still moving, still alive. For the next 2 hours, Jace divided his attention between monitoring the ship's systems and checking on Alara. She remained unconscious, but the patterns on her skin occasionally flickered with faint light, suggesting she was still fighting, still contributing to the ship's survival on some level. When the navigation system chimed to indicate they were approaching their destination, Jace allowed himself a moment of hope. They had made it this far against the odds. Perhaps they could. The hyperdrive failed with a shriek of protesting machinery and a violent shudder that ran the length of the ship. Alarms blared across every console as the Nixara dropped out of hyperspace with catastrophic force. Jace was thrown from his seat, slamming into the cockpit wall before he could brace himself. Pain exploded through his already injured body, and for a moment, darkness threatened to engulf him. Fighting to remain conscious, he pulled himself back to the controls. The ship was tumbling through normal space, its stabilizers offline. Through the spinning viewport, he caught glimpses of a planet, their destination, though they were approaching it far too quickly and at the wrong angle for a safe landing. With desperate focus, Jace managed to bring the stabilizers back online and arrest the ship's spin. The planet filled the viewport now, a blue-green world with vast oceans and scattered continents. Beautiful, but rapidly becoming a potential grave. "Alara," he called out, hoping she might regain consciousness. "I could use some help here." She remained unresponsive, the patterns on her skin completely dark now. Whatever strength she had lent to the ship was exhausted. Jace turned his attention back to the controls. The Nyxara was entering the planet's atmosphere, the hull heating rapidly as friction built up. Without functional heat shields, they would burn up before reaching the surface. Unless, with a decisive motion, Jace activated the emergency protocols. Compartments throughout the ship sealed automatically as he depressurized non-essential sections. The sudden venting of atmosphere created thrust, adjusting their entry angle to a more survivable trajectory. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Next, he diverted all remaining power to the forward shields, creating a makeshift heat barrier. The ship continued to descend, still too fast but no longer in immediate danger of disintegration. The surface details of the planet became visible. Oceans, mountains, forests. Jace searched for a suitable landing zone, somewhere flat and open. A wide plateau came into view, and he adjusted course toward it, using the last of the maneuvering thrusters. "Hang on," he muttered to the unconscious Alara as he prepared for impact. "This is going to be rough." The Nyxara struck the plateau with bone-jarring force, skidding across the surface in a shower of sparks and torn metal. Jace braced himself as best he could, but the impact still sent him crashing against the console. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, then to a pinpoint of light, before darkness claimed him entirely. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The smell of burning circuitry, the hiss of escaping air, the distant sound of warning klaxons, muffled as if underwater. Jace opened his eyes to a cockpit bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting. The main power was out, most systems offline. He tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his body. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, broken, most likely. With his functioning right arm, he released his safety harness and carefully extracted himself from the pilot's seat. The cockpit floor was tilted at a severe angle, suggesting the Nyxara had come to rest nose down. "Alara," he called out, his voice hoarse. When no response came, he made his way painfully to the co-pilot's seat. She was still there, secured by her harness, but worryingly still. The impact had thrown her forward against the restraints, and a trickle of silvery fluid, blood, ran from a cut on her forehead. The circuit patterns on her skin remained dark and lifeless. "Alara," Jace repeated, gently shaking her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. He checked for a pulse and found it, even fainter than before but still present. She was alive, but barely. The ship groaned around them, the hull protesting as it cooled and contracted. They couldn't stay here. The Nyxara was damaged beyond immediate repair, and the life support systems were failing completely. They needed to get outside, assess their situation, find shelter. With painful effort, Jace released Alara's harness and carefully lifted her from the seat. His broken arm screamed in protest, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. Using his good arm and shoulder to support most of her weight, he made his way toward the main hatch. The corridor leading there was blocked by fallen debris, forcing him to take a circuitous route through the engine room and cargo bay. Every step was an exercise in determination, his own injuries threatening to overwhelm him as he carried Alara's unconscious form. When he finally reached the main hatch, he found it jammed shut from the impact. The emergency release mechanism was similarly damaged. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. After everything they'd been through, to die trapped in a broken ship on an uninhabited planet seemed cruelly anticlimactic. Then his gaze fell on a maintenance access port near the floor, small, but perhaps large enough for them to squeeze through if he could get it open. setting Alara down gently. Jace searched for something to use as a pry bar. A section of broken conduit served the purpose, and with agonizing effort, he managed to force the access port open. Fresh air rushed in, cool, slightly sweet-smelling, and gloriously breathable. Jace took a deep breath, feeling strength return to his limbs despite the pain of his injuries. He turned back to Alara, concerned by her continued unconsciousness. The circuit patterns on her skin remained dark, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Whatever she had done to maintain the hyperdrive had depleted her far beyond normal exhaustion. "Hang in there," he murmured as he carefully maneuvered her toward the access port. "We made it this far. I'm not losing you now." Getting her through the narrow opening was a challenge, especially with his broken arm, but determination drove him forward. Finally, they were both outside, lying on soft grass beneath an alien sky streaked with the colors of sunset. The Nixara had carved a deep furrow in the plateau before coming to rest at an angle, partially embedded in the ground. Smoke rose from multiple hull breaches, and scattered debris marked their landing path. It was a miracle they had survived at all. Jace turned his attention to their surroundings. The plateau extended for several kilometers, bordered by dense forest to the north and east, mountains to the west, and what appeared to be a cliff edge to the south. The air was warm but comfortable, with a light breeze carrying the scent of unfamiliar vegetation. They needed shelter before nightfall. The ship was too damaged to be safe, and without knowing the local wildlife or weather patterns, remaining in the open seemed unwise. Jace spotted a formation of rocks near the forest edge that might provide some protection. With renewed purpose, he gathered Alara in his arms once more, ignoring the protest of his broken bones, and began the slow journey toward potential safety. The rock formation turned out to be better than he had hoped. A shallow cave, formed by massive boulders leaning against each other. The interior was dry and relatively warm, with enough space for both of them to lie comfortably. Most importantly, it offered protection from the elements and any curious wildlife. Jace made Alara as comfortable as possible, using his jacket as a pillow for her head. Then, fighting exhaustion and pain, he returned to the ship to salvage what he could before darkness fell completely. The access port allowed him back inside, though navigating the tilted corridors was even more challenging now that fatigue was setting in. He managed to locate the emergency supplies in the crew quarters: a medical kit, emergency rations, a portable heater, and a communication device, though the latter would be useless without a relay station. He also found a storage compartment containing water purification tablets and a few basic tools, everything he could carry with one functional arm. He stuffed into a salvage bag. Before leaving, he made a final stop at the cockpit to retrieve the data disk Alara had given him, the evidence of the Council's genocide against her people. It was still in his pocket, miraculously undamaged. Night had fallen by the time Jace returned to the cave. The sky above was a tapestry of unfamiliar stars, beautiful in their alien configurations. Under different circumstances, he might have appreciated the view more. Alara hadn't moved, her condition unchanged. Using the portable heater, Jace brought the temperature of their shelter to a comfortable level, then turned his attention to his own injuries. The medical kit contained a bone-setting device, which he used on his broken arm with gritted teeth. The pain was excruciating, but brief, as the device aligned the bone and generated a hardening compound that functioned as an instant cast. For his broken ribs and other injuries, he applied healing patches that delivered pain relief and accelerated tissue regeneration. It wasn't a proper medical treatment, but it would keep him functional until they could find real help. With his immediate needs addressed, Jace turned his attention back to Alara. Her skin remained ashen, the circuit patterns dark and lifeless. Her breathing was so shallow that several times he had to check closely to confirm she was still alive. The medical kit had been designed for humans, not Serolith physiology. Jace had no idea if any of the treatments would help her or potentially cause harm. After hesitating, he decided to limit his intervention to cleaning the cut on her forehead and applying a basic healing patch. Beyond that, he didn't dare risk more without understanding her biology better. "You need to wake up," he told her softly. "I don't know how to help you." No response came. Exhausted by his efforts and still in considerable pain despite the medication, Jace settled beside her. He arranged the portable heater to maintain a comfortable temperature through the night, then allowed himself to drift into a fitful sleep. Dreams came, fragmented and chaotic. He was back on the battlefield during his Defense Force days, watching helplessly as his squad was overrun. Then, he was in the hidden shelter on Zovari, surrounded by the ghosts of Serolith, who watched him with accusing eyes. Finally, he stood before the Genetic Purity Council, holding Alara's lifeless body as they applauded the extinction of another impure species. He woke with a start, heart racing. Daylight filtered into the cave, indicating he had slept through the night. Beside him, Alara remained unconscious, but something had changed. A faint glow had returned to some of the circuit patterns on her skin, not the bright luminescence he had seen before, but a subtle indication that something within her was still fighting. "Alara," he said hopefully, touching her shoulder. No response, but the patterns briefly glowed brighter at the contact. Jace frowned, considering. The patterns had always seemed most active when she was interfacing with technology. Perhaps she needed that connection to recover. He retrieved the communication device from the salvage bag. It was a standard model, capable of both local and deep space transmission when connected to a proper relay. More importantly, it contained basic computing circuits that might be compatible with Serolith biotechnology. Carefully, he placed the device against Alara's hand, arranging her fingers to make contact with the main circuit board. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the patterns on her fingers began to extend into the device, connecting with its circuitry. The faint glow spread up her arm, across her chest, and eventually to her face. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Still, it was progress. Encouraged, Jace searched through the salvage supplies for anything else with active circuitry. The portable heater had a small control module, and the medical kit contained diagnostic equipment with basic processors. He arranged these items around Alara, ensuring her skin made contact with each one. The effect was gradual but unmistakable. The circuit patterns across her body grew steadily brighter, and her breathing deepened and stabilized. Whatever energy these devices contained, she was absorbing it, using it to restore herself. While she recovered, Jace ventured outside to assess their situation in daylight. The plateau stretched before him. The crashed Nixara, a stark reminder of their precarious circumstances. The ship was more severely damaged than he had initially realized. The hull had split in several places, and what appeared to be the main power core was exposed and obviously non-functional. Any hope of repairing the vessel enough to leave the planet evaporated as he surveyed the wreckage. They were stranded, at least until they could find another way off-world or signal for help. The data disk in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. The evidence it contained was worthless if they couldn't get it to the Galactic Union Senate. And without that evidence, the Council would continue its operations unchecked, possibly hunting down other impure species under the guise of genetic security. Jace returned to the cave, deep in thought. To his surprise, Alara was sitting up, though she still looked weak. The circuit patterns on her skin glowed steadily now, not as bright as before, but certainly more alive than they had been. "You're awake," he said, relief washing over him. Her violet eyes focused on him with effort. "Thanks to you." Her voice was raspy but coherent. The technological interface, it helped. "I figured it might." Jace sat beside her. "How are you feeling?" Depleted, she admitted. What I did to maintain the hyperdrive, it nearly burned out my biological circuits. I'll recover, but slowly. She glanced around the cave. Where are we? The planet we were aiming for, Jace replied. Uninhabited, as far as I can tell. Breathable atmosphere. Hospitable environment. And the Nixara? Jace shook his head. Beyond repair, at least with what we have available. We're stranded. Alara absorbed this information with a calmness that surprised him. Then we adapt. It's what my people always did. Your people, Jace echoed, remembering the shelter on Zovari. I'm sorry we couldn't find survivors. A shadow crossed her face. I had prepared myself for that possibility long ago. Finding the shelter intact was more than I had hoped for. She paused, then added, and I'm not entirely alone anymore. The simple statement carried more weight than Jace expected. He had been thinking of their partnership as temporary, a matter of survival and mutual benefit. But from Alara's perspective, he was perhaps the first person in decades who knew the truth about her species, who didn't see her as a threat or an anomaly to be eliminated. No, you're not, he agreed softly. They spent the next few days establishing a more permanent camp near the cave. Jace made regular trips to the Nixara to salvage useful materials and equipment. Though the ship would never fly again, many of its components could be repurposed for survival needs. Alara's strength returned gradually. The circuit patterns on her skin grew brighter each day, and she began to assist with the salvage operations. Her knowledge of Serolith technology proving invaluable in identifying components that might otherwise have seemed worthless. They converted part of the cave into a living space, using panels from the ship's interior to create walls and floors. A crude solar collector, fashioned from the Nixara's auxiliary power array, provided enough energy to power the heater and a few other essential devices. Water came from a spring they discovered half a kilometer from the cave, pure enough to drink without treatment. Food was more challenging until Alara identified several plant species similar to those that had grown on Serolith worlds. With her guidance, they established a small garden of edible vegetation to supplement their dwindling emergency rations. As days turned into weeks, a routine emerged. Mornings were spent on survival tasks, gathering water, tending the garden, maintaining their shelter. Afternoons were dedicated to salvage work, gradually stripping the Nixara of anything useful. Evenings were for rest and, increasingly, conversation. Jace found himself sharing stories from his Defense Force days, carefully edited to emphasize the camaraderie rather than the combat. Alara spoke of Serolith culture, their art, their music, their philosophy of harmony between biological and technological systems. We never saw technology as separate from nature, she explained one evening as they sat outside the cave, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of purple and gold. To us, it was simply another expression of life's ingenuity. We didn't build machines. We grew them, nurtured them, communicated with them as partners. Is that why the Council feared you? Jace asked. Because your technology was so different? Alara considered this. Partly. But I think it was more fundamental than that. The Council's power is built on control. Controlling technology, controlling evolution, controlling the narrative of what constitutes purity in the galaxy. She gestured to the patterns on her skin. We represented a path where such control was unnecessary, where biological and technological systems could evolve together naturally. That threatened not just their technology, but their entire worldview. Jace thought about the rigid hierarchy he had observed during his time in the Defense Force, the emphasis on standardization and conformity. I can see why that would frighten them, he admitted. Fear often drives the greatest atrocities, Alara said softly. But it doesn't excuse them. The data disk, containing evidence of the Council's genocide, remained a constant presence in Jace's thoughts. They had established that the Nixara's long-range communication systems were beyond repair, meaning they had no way to transmit the information to the Galactic Union. Their only hope was eventual rescue or finding another settlement on the planet, though their initial surveys had revealed no signs of habitation. Their situation changed abruptly in the third week after the crash. Jace was returning from a salvage run when he spotted something in the sky, a small craft descending toward the plateau. His first instinct was caution. It could be the Council, tracking them down to finish what they had started. He dropped the salvage parts and raced back to the cave. "Alara! Someone's coming!" She emerged from the shelter, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "Council? I don't know. The ship is too far away to identify." He grabbed the neural disruptor, which he had kept charged for protection against potential predators. "We should hide until we know who it is." They retreated deeper into the cave system, which they had discovered extended further into the mountainside than initially apparent. From a concealed vantage point, they watched as the craft landed near the Nixara's wreckage. It wasn't a council vessel. The design was all wrong, more utilitarian than military. As they watched, a hatch opened, and 3 figures emerged. They wore environment suits despite the breathable atmosphere, suggesting caution rather than familiarity with the planet. "Salvagers," Jace speculated, "or scientists?" "Not council, at least," Alara replied, her voice tight with tension. "But that doesn't mean they're friendly." The newcomers moved around the Nixara, clearly examining the wreckage. One carried a scanner of some kind, which they periodically aimed at the surrounding area. "They're looking for survivors," Jace realized. "This might be our chance to get off planet." Alara's hand closed around his wrist. "Wait. We don't know who they are or how they would react to me. The Council has had decades to spread their propaganda about the Seraph. I might be seen as a dangerous anomaly, rather than a person." It was a valid concern. Even before the Seraph genocide, humanoid species with significant biological differences had often faced discrimination in the Galactic Union. Now, with the Council's influence spread throughout the galaxy, someone with Alara's distinctive features might indeed be treated with fear or hostility. "Let me approach them first," Jace suggested. "I'll assess the situation before revealing your presence." After a moment's hesitation, Alara nodded. "Be careful, and take this." She handed him a small device they had salvaged from the Nixara, a Seraph communication implant. "If you activate it, I'll be able to hear what's happening and come if you need help." Jace tucked the device into his ear, then moved toward the cave entrance. "I'll be back soon," he promised. He approached the newcomers openly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. The neural disruptor was hidden at the small of his back. The 3 figures noticed his approach and immediately turned toward him, one raising what appeared to be a weapon. "That's far enough," called a voice, amplified through the environment suit speaker. "Identify yourself." "My name is Jace Rowan," he replied, stopping as instructed. "I was the pilot of that ship." He gestured toward the Nixara. "Crashed here about 3 weeks ago." The figures exchanged glances. The one with the scanner consulted the device, then said something to the others that Jace couldn't hear. After a brief discussion, the apparent leader stepped forward. "I'm Captain Liara Voss of the independent research vessel Horizon. We detected your crash site during a planetary survey." The figure reached up and removed her helmet, revealing a woman with dark skin, silver-streaked hair, and the distinctive facial markings of someone from the Rigelian systems. "Are there other survivors?" Jace hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Just me," he said finally, deciding to keep Alara's existence secret until he knew more about these people. Captain Voss studied him with sharp eyes. "Our scans detected 2 distinct life signs in this area, one of them non-human. Want to try again?" So much for secrecy. Jace considered his options. Running was pointless, and fighting would only end badly. Truth, or at least a version of it, seemed the best approach. My passenger, he admitted. She's wary of strangers. We've had some trouble with the Genetic Purity Council. At the mention of the council, the captain's expression hardened. The council doesn't have jurisdiction in this sector. This is fringe territory, beyond Union control. That's good to know, Jace said cautiously. But the council doesn't always respect jurisdictional boundaries, especially when they're hunting something they consider a threat. Captain Voss exchanged another look with her companions. And what exactly do they consider a threat in this case? Jace chose his next words carefully. A survivor of a species they'd rather pretend never existed. The captain's eyes widened slightly, and she gestured for her companions to lower their weapons. You have a Serolith with you, she said. Not a question but a statement. Jace tensed, ready to reach for the neural disruptor. You know about the Serolith? More than the council would like, Captain Voss replied with a grim smile. The fringe territories have long memories. Mr. Rowan, we remember the species that disappeared during the genetic purification era, as the council likes to call it. The Serolith were not the only victims, just the most thoroughly erased. Relief washed over Jace, followed quickly by suspicion. This could be a trap, a ploy to draw Alara out. As if reading his thoughts, Captain Voss continued. We're not council agents. Mr. Rowan, the Horizon is part of the Fringe Coalition, independent worlds and stations that operate beyond Union control. Many of us are refugees from council expansion, or those who oppose their policies. Through the communication implant, Jace heard Alara's voice. Ask her about Zovari. A true ally would know the significance. What do you know about Zovari? Jace asked, watching the captain's reaction closely. Her expression softened. The Royal House of the Serolith, known for their advancements in biointegration technology. Their home system was quarantined after the alleged contagion outbreak that was actually a council-engineered genocide. She paused, then added with deliberate emphasis. The last princess of House Zovari was rumored to have escaped with the genetic codes for living technology. In his ear, Jace heard Alara's sharp intake of breath, followed by, She knows. You can trust her. My companion would like to meet you, Jace said, relaxing slightly. But I need your word that she'll be treated with respect, and that her presence will remain confidential. You have it, Captain Voss assured him. The Fringe Coalition has no love for the Council or its policies. Jace activated the implant's two-way function. It's safe, he told Alara. You can come out. A few minutes later, Alara emerged from the cave and approached cautiously. The circuit patterns on her skin glowed softly in the fading daylight, creating a luminous outline around her slender form. Captain Voss and her companions stared in undisguised amazement. One of them whispered something that sounded like, It's really true, while the captain herself stepped forward with a respectful inclination of her head. On behalf of the Fringe Coalition, I welcome you, she said formally. We had heard rumors that a Serolith might have survived, but until now, they were just that, rumors. Alara studied the captain with her violet eyes. How did you know about House Zovari? That information was purged from all Union records. The Coalition maintains its own historical archives, independent of Union censorship, Captain Voss explained. And there are those among us old enough to remember the time before the purification era, who passed down the truth orally when written records were too dangerous to keep. A flicker of hope crossed Alara's face. Are there records of other Serolith survivors? The captain's expression turned regretful. None confirmed. There were reports of possible sightings in the Outer Rim territories about 20 years ago, but nothing since then. She hesitated, then added, Until now. Alara absorbed this with visible disappointment, but not surprise. She had already confronted the likelihood of being the last of her kind. What happens now? Jace asked, bringing the conversation back to their immediate situation. We offer you passage off this planet, Captain Voss replied. Our mission here is complete, and we're returning to Coalition space. You would both be welcome to join us. The Council will be looking for us, Jace pointed out. They know we survived, and they'll want to finish what they started. The Horizon is well equipped to avoid Union patrols, the captain assured him. And once we reach Coalition territory, the Council's authority ends. You would be safe there. Jace and Alara exchanged glances. After weeks of believing they were stranded, possibly forever, the offer of rescue and safety seemed almost too good to be true. But their options were limited, and the alternative was remaining on an uninhabited planet until their salvage supplies eventually ran out. We have something, Jace said slowly, thinking of the data disk. Evidence of what the Council did to the Cerealith. Records, genetic data, proof of the genocide. It needs to reach the Union Senate. There are still those within the Union who would act if they knew the truth. Captain Voss's expression turned thoughtful. The Coalition has contacts within the Senate, representatives from worlds that maintain dual membership. We could ensure your evidence reaches the right people. She glanced at Alara. But it would mean you both facing potential exposure. The Council would do everything in their power to discredit the information and eliminate its sources. I've been hunted for 50 years, Alara said quietly. Living in stasis, then hiding on an uninhabited world. That's not truly living. If my existence can help bring justice for my people, then the risk is worth it. Jace found himself nodding in agreement. Somewhere in the past few weeks, Alara's cause had become his own. Perhaps it was witnessing her dignity in the face of overwhelming loss. Or perhaps it was his own disillusionment with the institutions he had once served. Either way, he couldn't walk away now. We accept your offer, he told Captain Voss. But we'll need to gather our supplies from the cave. And there are components from the Nixara that Alara believes could be valuable in reconstructing certain aspects of Cerealith technology. Take whatever time you need, the captain replied. We can assist with the salvage operation. By nightfall, they had transferred their essential supplies and the most valuable salvage from the Nixara to the Horizon. The research vessel was larger than Jace had initially estimated. Not a massive ship, but comfortably equipped for a crew of 12, with sufficient laboratory space for scientific missions. Captain Voss introduced them to the rest of her team, a diverse group representing several species, including 2 that Jace didn't recognize, presumably from beyond Union territory. All regarded Alara with varying degrees of curiosity and respect, but none with fear or hostility. As they prepared for departure, Jace took a final look at the plateau that had been their home for the past 3 weeks. In the light of the setting sun, even the broken hull of the Nixara held a certain beauty, a monument to survival against overwhelming odds. Ready? Alara asked, coming to stand beside him at the Horizon's viewport. Jace nodded. Ready for whatever comes next. The Horizon lifted off smoothly, rising through the atmosphere with none of the desperate struggle that had marked their arrival. As the planet receded below them, Jace felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. They were no longer stranded, no longer alone in their fight against the Council. Captain Voss joined them as the ship prepared for its jump to hyperspace. Our first stop will be Haven Station in the Proxima sector, she informed them. It's a Coalition stronghold and trading hub. From there, we can arrange secure transport to Meridian, where the Coalition leadership can evaluate your evidence and determine the best way to present it to sympathetic Senate members. How long until we reach Haven? Jace asked. 3 days at standard hyperspace velocity, the captain replied. We'll be traveling a circuitous route to avoid Union checkpoints, but our drive system is considerably more efficient than what you had on the Nixara. As if on cue, the stars outside the viewport stretched into lines as the Horizon entered hyperspace. The transition was smooth, almost imperceptible compared to the Nixara's shuddering jumps. You should both rest, Captain Voss suggested. The ship's doctor would like to examine your injuries when you're ready, and I've assigned you quarters in the crew section. She hesitated, then added, There's also someone aboard who is very interested in meeting you. Alara, our xenobiologist, Dr. Marcus Kane, has studied what little information exists about Serolith biology. He believes your people's approach to biointegration could revolutionize medical treatment throughout the galaxy. Alara's expression brightened at this. I would be happy to share what I know, though I am an engineer, not a geneticist. Any information would be valuable, the captain assured her. The Council has been thorough in its efforts to erase all knowledge of Serolith achievements. After the captain left, Jace and Alara were shown to their quarters, adjacent rooms with a connecting door, each equipped with a bed, storage space, and basic amenities that seemed luxurious after weeks of cave dwelling. It doesn't seem real, Alara said as they stood in the corridor between their rooms. After so long, to find allies who know the truth. It's a start, Jace agreed. But we still have a long way to go before the Council faces justice for what they did. Alara nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the corridor lights. But we're no longer facing it alone. She placed her hand against his chest, over his heart, and the circuit patterns on her skin pulsed once with warm light, the same gesture she had made before he undertook his desperate diversion on Zovari. What does that mean? Jace asked. You did that before, but never explained it. A smile touched her lips. It's an old Serolith tradition. When two paths become one, when strangers become allies in a common cause, we acknowledge the connection. She hesitated, then added softly. Some would translate it as, my life is linked with yours now. The simple explanation carried more weight than Jace expected. In the span of a few weeks, he had gone from a solitary drifter, seeking a fresh start, to someone bound to a cause greater than himself, the survival of a nearly extinct species and the pursuit of justice for a forgotten genocide. My life is linked with yours now, he repeated, the words feeling right somehow. For the first time since waking from stasis. Alara's smile reached her eyes, the luminous patterns on her skin brightening in response to the emotion. Without further words, she retreated to her quarters, the door sliding shut behind her. Jace entered his own room, fatigue finally catching up with him now that the immediate crisis had passed. As he settled onto the bed, the first real bed he'd slept in since the crash, he found himself thinking not of the challenges ahead, but of the strange twist of fate that had brought him here. He had bought a ship at auction, hoping for a fresh start. Instead, he had found a purpose, a cause worth fighting for, and perhaps something more. Something he wasn't quite ready to name yet. With these thoughts drifting through his mind, Jace fell into the first truly restful sleep he had experienced in weeks, no longer haunted by dreams of past failures or present dangers. The journey to Haven Station passed without incident. Jace spent much of the time in the Horizon's medical bay, where the ship's doctor treated his injuries with technology far more sophisticated than the emergency supplies they had relied on after the crash. By the time they approached their destination, his broken arm had healed enough to remove the makeshift cast, and his other injuries were well on their way to recovery. Alara, meanwhile, divided her time between consultations with Dr. Kane, the xenobiologist, and working with the ship's engineers to salvage what they could from the Serolith components they had taken from the Nixara. The circuit patterns on her skin had regained their full luminosity, indicating her own recovery was complete. On the third day, Captain Voss called them to the bridge as the Horizon prepared to exit hyperspace. We're approaching Haven Station, she announced. I thought you might want to see it as we arrive. The ship dropped smoothly into normal space, and a massive structure came into view through the main viewport. Haven Station wasn't like the utilitarian Union stations Jace was familiar with. It was a sprawling, organic-looking construction, with sections that appeared to have grown rather than been built. Multiple docking arms extended from a central hub, accommodating vessels of various sizes and designs. "It's beautiful," Alara breathed, moving closer to the viewport. "The architecture. It has elements of Serolith design principles." "Not coincidentally," Captain Voss said with a smile. "The original station was constructed over 70 years ago, with input from several species the Council later designated as genetically divergent. The Serolith contributed significantly to the life support and adaptive growth systems." A communications officer reported, "Haven Control has granted us docking clearance at Arm 7. They're requesting information on our passengers." "Tell them we're bringing refugees seeking coalition asylum," the captain replied. "Add security protocol Zeta 9. The officer nodded and relayed the message. A moment later, he reported, "Control acknowledges. We're being assigned a secure docking berth with restricted access." "Good," Captain Voss said, turning to Jace and Alara. "Protocol Zeta 9 is our highest security designation. Only those with Coalition leadership clearance will know of your arrival. We take the threat from the Council very seriously." The Horizon glided toward one of the docking arms, which appeared to adjust its shape slightly to accommodate the ship's specific configuration. The docking process was completed with a gentle shudder as magnetic clamps engaged. "Welcome to Haven," Captain Voss said. "The heart of the Fringe Coalition, and the first place in 50 years where a Serolith can walk freely without fear of the Council." They disembarked through a private airlock into a reception area, unlike any Jace had seen before. The walls appeared to be living material, pulsing gently with internal light that adjusted to create a comfortable ambience. The air was fresher than typical station atmosphere, carrying subtle scents that reminded him of the forest on the uninhabited planet. Waiting for them was a small delegation, 3 individuals of different species, all wearing the same insignia that Captain Voss and her crew displayed: a spiral galaxy with an open circle at its center. "Coalition intelligence," the captain explained quietly. "They'll escort us to secure quarters where we can discuss next steps." One of the delegates, a tall, slender being with iridescent skin and elongated features, stepped forward. "On behalf of the Coalition Council, I welcome you to Haven," they said in a melodious voice. "I am Director Thala, head of Coalition intelligence operations in this sector." Their gaze lingered on Alara, and for a moment, emotion seemed to overwhelm them. To see a Serolith alive after so many years, it confirms what many of us have long hoped. They composed themselves and continued. "We have prepared accommodations in the secure diplomatic section. Once you're settled, the Council representatives would like to meet with you to discuss the evidence you've brought and plan our approach to the Union Senate." As they followed Director Thala through the station corridors, Jace was struck by the diversity of beings they encountered. Unlike Union stations, where certain species were rarely seen or confined to specific sectors, Haven appeared to be a true melting pot of galactic life. He recognized some species that were officially categorized as protected minorities under Union law, a designation that often meant restricted rights and limited movement. Here, they moved freely, engaged in commerce, conversation, and daily life without the ever-present scrutiny of Council observers or Union security forces. It was, Jace realized, what the galaxy could be without the Council's restrictive policies and obsession with genetic purity. Their quarters in the diplomatic section were spacious and well-appointed, with adjoining rooms similar to their arrangement on the Horizon. A shared common area provided space for meetings and meals. "The Council representatives will meet with you tomorrow," Director Thala informed them as they settled in. "This gives you time to rest and prepare. If you need anything, simply use the communication panel. The station's resources are at your disposal." After the director and their escorts departed, Jace turned to Captain Voss. "What happens now?" "Now, we present your evidence to those who can use it most effectively," she replied. The coalition has been gathering information on council activities for decades, building a case against their policies. What you've brought may be the final piece needed to expose them to the wider galaxy. Will that be enough? Alara asked. The council has had 50 years to establish their narrative and consolidate power. The truth has power of its own, Captain Voss said, especially when presented by a living witness they claimed could not exist. She looked at Alara with respect. Your very survival contradicts everything the council has said about the Serolith. That, combined with the historical records you've preserved, creates a compelling case that even their allies in the Senate will find difficult to ignore. After the captain left to make her report to coalition leadership, Jace and Alara found themselves alone for the first time since their rescue. The reality of their situation was still sinking in, from stranded survivors to potential catalysts for galactic political change in the span of a few days. Are you ready for this? Jace asked her, as they stood by the viewport overlooking the bustling station. Once we present the evidence, there's no going back. The council will know you're alive and actively working against them. Alara watched the diverse beings moving through the station below, her expression contemplative. For decades, I existed in stasis, neither living nor dead. Then for weeks, we survived in isolation, focused only on immediate needs. She turned to face him, the circuit patterns on her skin pulsing with quiet determination. Now, I have the chance to give meaning to my survival, to ensure my people are remembered, and their destroyers face justice. Yes, I'm ready. Jace nodded, admiring her resolve. Then we do this together. Together, she agreed, placing her hand over his heart in what he now recognized as the Serolith gesture of connection. That night, as Jace lay in bed contemplating the path that had brought him here, he realized something important. The worn-out, cynical ex-soldier who had purchased a supposedly haunted ship at auction no longer existed. In his place was someone with a purpose, someone who had found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. He had bought a ship on auction and hadn't known it came with a beautiful alien woman. But what he really hadn't known was that it would come with a cause, with allies, with a future more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. As he drifted off to sleep, Jace found himself thinking not of the challenges ahead, but of the violet-eyed woman in the next room who had changed his life irrevocably. Whatever came next, they would face it together, their lives linked by circumstance and choice, by a ship that had brought them together across the vast distances of space and time. And in that thought, he found a peace he hadn't known in years.